I don't know how closely you listened to the reading from the second letter to Timothy. You might have been listening to it with your intellectual head, which was, well, that really wasn't one of Paul's letters. It was probably later in his... Let it go. It might have been curated from some of his writings. It doesn't matter. And if it doesn't sound really super duper like Paul, I really think it sounds like somebody at the end of something who realizes something awesome happened in their life and continues every day to give thanks for it and does not understand exactly how that person got chosen, but was grateful that it happened. I have fought the good fight, run the race. It's not often I would use the word wistful with the Apostle Paul. But I would say this, in his writings, as he tried to understand what it meant for him to be tapped out by God, to become a disciple, to become a follower of Jesus, he really showed the full breadth of his humanity in his struggle and his gift to move against his training and find a sense of grace. Now, I must tell you, I find comfort in Paul and a deep personal connection to him. And I deeply discovered that when I was doing the spiritual reflection part of my doctoral thesis. My doctorate was and still is, a self-study of can an older priest learn new tools, like listening better. And so that became part of the practice I evolved. And when I was looking for a moment to express this sense of learning, I remembered the parable of the loving father, also known as the prodigal son. And in that parable, that story, you know, where the younger son goes off, spends his inheritance, winds up in the pigsties, and then has a come-to-himself moment, and then goes back willing to do anything, and is embraced by the love of his father. And what a joyous moment that is, a come-to-himself moment. And then there's the older brother. The older brother has been working dutiful forever within the confines of all the rules. And this younger wastrel comes back. Good things happen to him. And the older brother says, but, and father is basically saying, arms open, you've always been with me. I have loved you forever. I believe the older brother was right on the cusp of his own come-to-himself moment, when grace would deeply touch him. I know that for myself. And I believe when Paul, while he did not write about this in his own words, but in the Acts of the Apostles, when he has knocked off his horse on the road to Damascus to persecute the Christians, when he is fully emblematic of that Pharisee who says, I give 10% of all that I have, I am not like those rogues and thieves, etc., etc., etc. When he's one of those, and he discovers the light, and he realizes the gift, and he elects to follow through with it and share it. And if we listen carefully to him pushing back against the noise of his upbringing, how hard he struggled to find phrases like faith alone. What is it that we are called to be followers in such a way that some would be apostles and some teachers and some prophets? He gave us so many gifts, this man named Paul. Pushing back against his origin as he began to understand perhaps just what that tax collector was doing when he said, have mercy on me, a sinner. Pushing back against all of that noise. Now, I know a little bit about noise in the last few days. I am visiting my grandchildren. And in traveling to visit my grandchildren, I have also listened to other music of my own choosing. I happen to like Sirius XM's Classic Rewind, so I get good 80s rock. And in it, right now, I cannot get David Lee Roth and Jump out of my head. And juxtaposed to that, having been with the grandchildren last night as we watched Robin Hood, the Disney version, and Roger Miller singing Oodle-Oddle Day, Little John and Robin Hood, and the two of them were playing all through my head last night. A lot of noise. Saw an ad that I kind of thought maybe that would have helped, a noise-canceling headphone. What it would be like to wear a noise-canceling headphone. You see them on the planes and people around town and whatever. And so I'm thinking, what would it be like for Paul to have worn a noise-canceling headphone in the way that he could start pushing back against his origin? Because I would imagine that if he'd had a noise-canceling headphone from day one, it would have kept him squarely in the Pharisaical thinking. You see this noise-canceling headphone that I saw in the TV commercial included a new feature, which seemed to kind of counter to the whole idea of a noise-canceling headphone. It had Alexa built into it. So you could be noise-canceling, but at the same time say, Alexa, find music for me. Alexa, go buy me a pizza. Alexa, go do this. Alexa, go do that. But I got to thinking, wow, what if Paul's, now you have to really stretch with me here, what if Paul's noise-canceling headphone, the one that was pushing back against his Pharisaical upbringing, his whole training, which could pull him down, what if he got like a new one when he got knocked off his horse that put him open to listening to God? And rather than it being Alexa, he could call on God with his noise-canceling headphone. And in that peace and tranquility, he could hear what God would have him do and find that strength. I don't know if you realize it, but you put on your noise-canceling headphones where you can hear God when you walk through the door today. So just give yourself a pat on the earlobes for that. You see, the whole point is listening. How hard is it to listen to God? Jesus talks about that when he talks about how hard it is for the one who says, I should be exalted. And he says, those that aren't humbled will be humbled, and those who are lowly will be exalted. The humble will be exalted. What is humility? Humility, by the way, is found as a root within the whole practice of spirituality, the rule of St. Benedict. And the word obedience within the rule of St. Benedict is best understood as obediere. That's the root word. And obediere means to hear or to listen. So one who listens or hears is obedient. Paul was modeling how hard it is to be obedient as he struggled in his writings and teachings in his full humanity. Which is another reason he's a great gift, because he did have that come to himself moment to draw us closer to God. So there are practices that may help us identify and find our own noise-canceling headphones that allow us to be closer to God. I've already spoken about the rule of St. Benedict, so I'll just visual aid you. This is John McQuiston's little book called Always We Begin, The Benedictine Way of Living. It's available. You can talk to Adam. He has copies a copy in his office. It's a marvelous meditation on the rule of St. Benedict by an Episcopalian who was a frustrated lawyer who really needed to get his life in balance. Paul is always struggling to talk about balance. You can hear him wistful in his last writing saying, I hope I got it right. I'm grateful how loved I am. So the first rule in the rule of St. Benedict is attend to these instructions, listen with the heart and the mind. They are provided in a spirit of goodwill. The first rule is simply this: live this life and do whatever is done in a spirit of loving kindness. Now, I think if Paul was accessing this concept as he was hearing God, he might hear God say to him, not Micah 6:8, because scripturally that's not correct. That doesn't show up till later in terms of designations. But the words of the prophet Micah, a student as astute and deep as Saul, then becoming Paul, would know. The prophet Micah says, do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with your God. Which frankly is the gospel in microcosm. And the rule of Benedict is just but one of a practice becoming more and more attuned to hearing God and shutting back the world in that moment with your spiritual noise-canceling headphones. Now there's another way. Another group does this, and they do it effectively. It would be people who participate in a 12-step program. I want you to think about a 12-step program. When somebody finally in their addiction gets to the point that the noise of the world has so overwhelmed them that they cannot handle it anymore, and they're finally at their lowest ebb, and all they can do, surrounded by others that have been guiding them as best they can, but they do it at that moment, they call out to whatever it is that's greater than themselves, and they hear that entity say, I am with you. I love you. I will help you. You cannot do this on your own, and now you know it. Call me what you will. So sometimes it's a highest power, or a name for God. It could be Jesus. It could be something else. But with that, and walking with others who have adopted the same noise-canceling headphones, as best as they can wear them, but hearing God through that discipline, they find themselves better able to be who God created them to be, to fight the good fight, to walk the walk, much like Paul guided us, to find that utter humility that comes from when you hit bottom and come back and realize what a great gift you've been given. I think Paul, when he got knocked off his horse, realized he had hit a different kind of bottom, that intellectualism alone wasn't enough. The heart was important as well. And so there's one other thing I might leave you with that's readily available to you. If you have a Book of Common Prayer, or can go online and easily find it, and it's in your prayer book, you're invited if you want to. You can go to page 833 if you like. Usually Episcopalians are very good at finding things in the prayer book right away. But we're going to go to the prayer attributed to St. Francis. Now I want you to think about St. Francis for a moment. Francis was a corrective 600 years after Benedict got on the scene. Francis shows up when papal power is at its highest zenith, its nadir. And he shows up and calls everybody back to a form of simplicity. He is saying, you've let the noise overwhelm you to the point that you're not listening for God anymore. You've fallen into the trap of the unjust judge, which you heard about last week. You have fallen into the trap of what 2 Timothy might say, as Paul wrote, the love of money is the root of all evil. You can see where it goes. And so as Francis offers us some simplicity, he basically helps us understand how important it is to try to push back against the noise that can push us into behavior patterns that keep us from fully realizing how embraced we are by that love of God. So let me just read this to you as if you are hearing it in your noise-canceling environment and you're taking it with you to hear it again and again, and maybe it will guide you. Lord, make us instruments of your peace. Where there is hatred, let us so love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is discord, union. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. Grant that we may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. These words are attributed to St. Francis and speak well of how he brought forth a rebirth of spirituality. I think Paul, the wistful Paul, just might have written them as well. And they guide us now, pushing back against the noise, but bringing us to that joyful song that's in our heart that allows us to go forth and share this good news. All these words I offer in the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.